By May 1984, the Panjshir Valley's floor had become a forbidden graveyard for Soviet aviation. Twisted Mi-24 Hind rotor blades, burned fuselages, and 23 downed gunships in just 6 weeks. So devastating that even Soviet commanders banned photographs. The official story blames enemy fire, but that does not explain why the helicopter once called the Invincible was slaughtered with such precision here. The answer, why the feared flying tank became a flying coffin, lies in a fatal design assumption and the ruthless geometry of mountain warfare. What was it about Panjshir that left trained crews choosing court-martial over certain death? Charred fuselage fragments littered the riverbanks, their serial numbers erased by fire and time. Rotor blades, once spinning at 2,000 revolutions per minute, now jutted from the silt like broken swords. In the spring of 1984, the Panjshir Valley became a wasteland of Soviet aviation, each wreck a silent record of a mission that never returned. Local villagers scavenged twisted aluminum for scrap. Soviet recovery teams rarely ventured into the open. Too many never made it back. Under the shadow of the mountains, the remains of Mi-24 Hinds piled up, dozens in just a few weeks. Official reports admitted to heavy losses, but the true number was whispered, not written. Wreckage. The ground told its own story. Scorched earth where fuel tanks erupted, cockpit glass shattered by high-velocity rounds, tail booms snapped clean by impact. Some days, the wrecks multiplied so quickly that even Soviet commanders lost count. Orders circled through the ranks to keep cameras away from the valley floor. Aircrews who survived spoke in hushed tones about the valley of death. For every Hind lost, 2 or 3 men vanished, sometimes without a trace. Death, no rescue flights, no memorials. The debris was left to rust under the relentless Afghan sun. In Moscow, the official line blamed enemy fire and bad luck. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. The same helicopter that had ruled the skies in the south now fell in clusters, cut down in the narrow corridors of Panjshir. The absence of bodies in the shattered hulls made the loss more chilling. The valley became a graveyard not just for machines, but for the confidence of Soviet air power. Each burned-out cockpit raised a new question. How could the flying tank fall so easily, so often, in this one place? The answer would not be found in the debris, but in the design philosophy that shaped the Hind, and in the unforgiving geometry of the mountains. Confidence. Soviet aviation planners measured the Panjshir Valley on their maps, a corridor stretching 150 kilometers, pinched to as little as 2 kilometers wide, hemmed in by rock walls that soared past 4,000 meters. The Mi-24 Hind, designed for the flat plains of Central Asia, was built around a doctrine that expected threats to come from below or the sides. Its titanium armor formed a protective shell beneath the cockpit and along the flanks, engineered to shrug off 12.7mm rounds fired upward from ground positions. The roof, in contrast, was left thin to save weight and preserve the helicopter's speed and lift. Every kilogram counted at altitude, and Soviet engineers gambled that no enemy could threaten from above. Panjshir's geometry turned that logic inside out. Helicopters forced into the valley's axis had no room to swing wide or climb above the peaks. The mountains dictated the flight path, straight, narrow, and predictable. To support ground columns or strike mujahideen positions, Hinds had to fly low and fast, hugging the valley floor. But at these altitudes, the thin air cut into rotor performance. Turning radius shrank, but not enough. The walls closed in, and the only way out was forward or back. From the ridgelines, mujahideen gunners looked down into the Hinds' exposed roof. The helicopter's armor, so effective against the upward arcs of rifle fire in the south, offered little protection here. Soviet crews found themselves flying through a gauntlet, the thick plates beneath them useless against plunging fire from above. The design that made the Hind a terror in open country became its undoing in Panjshir. The valley's geometry dictated the terms of battle, and the flying tank was trapped by its own doctrine, unable to adapt to threats that came from the sky itself. From the ridgelines above Panjshir, the laws of ballistics turned against the Hind. DShK heavy machine guns and ZPU-1 anti-aircraft cannons sat between 800 and 1,200 meters above the valley floor, waiting in silence. Each weapon was loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds, 14.5 millimeters in diameter, leaving the barrel at nearly 1,000 meters per second. The physics was brutal and simple. At a downward angle of 60 degrees, the path through the Hind's thin roof armor was short, the impact almost direct. What titanium could shrug off from below, it could not withstand from above. Massoud understood this geometry better than any Soviet tactician. He mapped the valley in arcs and kill zones, not just terrain features. His crews drilled for patience and precision. They learned to fire not at the helicopter, but at where it would be seconds later, leading the target, calculating the Hind's speed and path. It was not enough to have firepower. It had to be timed. 3, sometimes 4 gun positions would wait in silence until the Hinds entered the designated corridor. Then, in a synchronized salvo, they unleashed a crossfire from multiple ridges, each gunner tracking a separate aircraft, each burst converging from above. The effect was devastating. Armor-piercing rounds punched through the roof, igniting fuel, shattering gearboxes, tearing through the cockpit. The Hind's design, so formidable in open country, became a liability. Top armor that was barely more than a shell offered no resistance. Soviet engineers had never planned for this angle of attack. In Panjshir, mountain height and gunner discipline turned every helicopter flight into a calculated risk. One misjudged turn, one predictable run, and the flying tank became a falling wreck. Massoud's system was more than a tactic. It was a weapon forged from geography and patience, a direct answer to Soviet overconfidence. 40 Mi-24 Hinds thundered into the Panjshir Valley for Panjshir VII, each one carrying not just armor and firepower, but the weight of expectation from Moscow. The offensive swelled in late April 1984, with helicopter sorties launching in waves to break Massoud's hold on the valley. Within 72 hours, the first losses were logged. Hinds fell to gunfire from unseen heights. The rhythm of the operation shifted from confidence to dread. Crews watched the valley floor for movement, but the real danger waited above, hidden along the ridgelines. Near the village of Ruka, a 4-ship Hind formation received the call. Ground troops pinned down, immediate support needed. The pilots knew the corridor, narrow and hemmed in by rock, with almost no room to maneuver. Each aircraft entered in tight formation, following the valley's spine. The lead Hind banked left, lining up on the target. The others fanned out behind, each one tracing the same predictable arc. On the ridges, Mujahideen gunners waited for this moment. 3 separate positions, each with heavy machine guns and anti-aircraft cannons, tracked the helicopter's progress. The valley's geometry forced the Hinds into a bottleneck, every movement visible from above. At the precise instant when all 4 helicopters committed to their attack run, the ridge lines erupted in synchronized fire. Armor-piercing rounds streaked downward at impossible angles, slamming through thin roof plating. The first Hind lost power instantly, trailing smoke as it plunged into the riverbed. The second took a burst through the cockpit, both crew dead before the aircraft nosed into the rocks. The third attempted to break right, only to turn directly into a storm of gunfire. The last Hind managed a controlled descent, landing hard on the valley floor, but the crew's fate was sealed. 90 seconds passed from first shot to final crash. 8 men gone. The valley filled with black smoke and the echo of secondary explosions. Soviet ground units listened to the radio silence, knowing rescue was impossible. Official logs would later mention mechanical failure or enemy action, but among the pilots, the story was already legend. Some crews began inventing technical faults or calling in sick, calculating the odds of survival against the certainty of punishment for refusal. The myth of the invincible Hind shattered in that brief, violent moment, a lesson written in wreckage and fear. Today, military planners still trust armor and tech against terrain's chaos. But in every conflict, geography writes its own rules, often in blood. The Mi-24's fate in Panjshir warns, overconfidence in hardware blinds us to the battlefield's oldest weapon. Tactical hubris rarely leaves survivors, only wreckage. What do you think?